If you are experiencing the sensation that you're spending more money to get less, there's three things that I would look at. One is, have you expanded distribution into places that might be competing for the realization of that revenue? And is it a question of how you're going to measure the allocation of your dollars against things like Amazon and wholesale, et cetera? Two is, have you gone into media channel diversification such that more of your dollars are being allocated to less efficient channels? That can create a similar sensation. And then three is more about the individual channel performance results that you're going after. Have you attempted to increase the budget such that your overall degradation has dipped exponentially into a place where you are actually increasing spend and getting less revenue in total than if you were to pull back? That could be related to optimization settings. Maybe there's too much view creeping in. Maybe there's too much budget being spent on existing customers as your customer base has grown. And you need to get back to religiously focusing on incremental clicks to net new customers against an incrementality read that makes you really effective in an individual channel.
This episode of the e-commerce playbook is brought to you by ShipBob. ShipBob is the #1 e-commerce fulfillment solution trusted by thousands of brands to deliver the fast and affordable shipping your customers expect. You can either outsource fulfillment or leverage ShipBob's technology in your own warehouse to streamline operations, get back time to grow your business, and reduce fulfillment costs by up to 30%. Get started in any of ShipBob's 50-plus global warehouses to track 2-day shipping, direct integrations with all major platforms and sales channels, branded custom packaging, and more. Just go to www.shipbob.com/thread to sign up today and get $1,000 in free shipping credits and 90% off implementation. That's www.shipbob.com/thread. Hey folks, welcome to the e-commerce playbook podcast. I'm your host, Richard Gaffin, director of digital product strategy here at Common Thread. And of course, I'm joined today by Taylor, who is our CEO here at CTC. Taylor, what's going on today? Repping the Pirates, huh?
Yeah, P for Portland to support you, Richard.
Thank you.
Also P for the Costa Mesa Pirates, my son's little league team. This was my practice hat. Love the spring training vibe there. So, yeah, and I'm also out of hair products, so I had to just, I've been wearing a hat more.
I was trying to think of like what a P city in Southern California would be. You could be repping. The only one I came up with was Placentia. I don't know if they have
the Placentia Mustangs. That was one of my biggest competition as a youth baseball player.
All right. Well, repping the Placentia Mustangs is Taylor Holiday today. And
are you a hair product guy, Richard? What do you put in your hair?
I let it. This is all natural right here. No, actually,
really, it's like you do water. Like, give me your routine to get there.
This is the hot tip. There's like a dry shampoo called Tap Secret that my wife introduced me to. And it makes it look like your hair is clean, which is helpful. And then the second part is that it has this like perfect hold. So I also have like very, very like fine hair. So I don't have thick, luscious hair. So the dry shampoo definitely helps with it. But anyway.
So we're across the street. So stay on this because it's going to tie to e-commerce here for a second. So across the street, in this little area where our office is Jack Henry. So Jack Henry, e-commerce brand that has built a salon. So they have like a salon that they sell their products. It's where I get my haircut. Shout out to the crew over there. Awesome people in the e-com space. But so I usually get their product and they turn me on to like so it's like a foam that you put in right when you get out of the shower that sort of gives your hair kind of like almost a shapeable. Oh, it almost feels textured like I've been in the ocean. Like I have like almost like a salty, that feeling. And then I'm a Hans de Foucault guy for my pomade usually, but I'm just out right now. So
there you go.
Big shout out to those two small brands making it happen.
Nice. Yeah. All right. Well, this has been the e-commerce playbook hair corner over here. I was trying to do Jeremy Allen White from The Bear for a while, but that requires like a whole sea salt spray.
Yeah, you got to really spend some time on it.
Boy, that one's tough. But anyway, okay. Those brands hit us up. We want to work for you. So speaking of brands hitting us up, I guess that'll be our segue. So we have a sort of, our sales team has been obviously talking to a lot of brands recently. And a lot of the time our salespeople are sort of our ears to the ground in terms of what's going on with the day-to-day, I guess, lived experience of people running e-commerce brands, because they get a strong sense of the problems that everybody is going through right now. And the question that one of our salespeople had for us was, or rather the refrain that they've been hearing from a lot of brands recently has been that they're having an issue with, quote, spending more to acquire the same amount of customers. And so we thought it would be interesting to dive into that specific problem, maybe talk about some of the macro reasons that's happening, maybe some more specific tactical reasons that can be addressed or counteracted. But basically, what we're going to do today. I'm just going to tee you up with that question, Taylor. And you're going to give us a master class on what to do when you feel like you're spending more to acquire the same amount of customers. So I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, well, first I want to talk through a few of the causes, okay? Because this is a very common thing. My ad spend has gone up 30%, my revenue's gone up 10%, or I've had to spend more and my revenue isn't up at all. Like that's the situation we're describing. So imagine you're a business that's increased your media spend 20% and you're flat, or you've increased your media spend 40% and you're 10%. And so you are finding that the marginal return on each next dollar of ad spend is being diminished. And it actually starts to feel like you're having to increase spend just to sustain your present state, which obviously impacts your overall profitability. Okay. So I want to talk through a number of the things that I've seen cause this experience. The first one is related to channel diversification. What happens when businesses expand into Amazon, other online retailers, wholesale, is that they are distributing the demand capture across multiple points, but continuing to allocate the media dollars into one point. So I'll give you a very practical example. You're a business and you've decided this year that you're going to expand to Amazon as a channel. And you are excited to launch into Amazon. You have Amazon over here on this separate P&L where you are realizing demand and also spending in that channel. So you have Amazon ad spend and Amazon revenue over here as if it's its own isolated experience. And then over here on the P&L, you have your .com revenue against your Meta spend and your Google spend and all your classic media dollars. And what you're not doing is assuming or allocating any of the Meta dollars against your Amazon revenue, as if they somehow are disassociated from each other and have no impact. Well, the reality is that in the customer's experience, you are still generating demand for a product that can be satiated at two separate points. So what happens is the idea that you're experiencing a less efficient return on your .com revenue could just be fractional demand capture being realized in multiple plates, but measured in just one. So this is very common. And there's a great Olivia Corey from House, who I respect their work a lot, has a great tweet that we should link in the show notes where she talks about the evidence that they have for the incremental impact of paid media on Amazon in particular. And so the simple reality is that Meta spend, or less so Google spend, primarily paid social spend, is driving Amazon revenue realization. And especially if your merchandise is duplicitous in both spaces, meaning you have the same things for sale on Amazon that you do on your .com, you will see your .com efficiency of acquisition be diminished because of that reality. That applies if you're also in Nordstrom's or Walmart or Best Buy or other online retailers where you're creating competition for yourself. So this causes you to reevaluate how you measure your dollars. And so when we talk about it, I feel like I have to spend more to make less. The first question I ask is, where are you measuring the realization of demand, and has that changed over time? This is very common, that changes in distribution create changes in revenue realization.
Gotcha. Okay. So I mean, it's interesting because that sort of seems like it's not a problem, or rather it's not, what you're not really doing is spending more to acquire less. It's just distributed and it's not being measured correctly, or like the attribution is being measured correctly. But to what extent is there?
Right. Well,
oh, go ahead.
that's the first thing that's the first thing to check. You're right. It may not be a problem.
Yeah.
The problem tends to be that what I see is that you ramped up Amazon spend as well, and that Amazon spend is brand and it's less efficient. And so now what you've done is you've introduced increased complexity in measurement that actually makes it harder to figure out. And that tends to create a quagmire of decision making that makes it harder to allocate against the most incremental opportunity. So that tends to lead to increased inefficiency in your media dollars because the measurement's more complex and you're not actually then allocating the capital appropriate. So yes, step one is to try to answer the question of what is the actual incremental impact across all of my channels. Then therefore, how do I allocate the dollars appropriately? So it may be a problem, it may not be a problem, but it requires you to go get more information as a first step.
If you run an e-commerce business, you have a lot on your plate. So why spend your time picking and packing orders? ShipBob is the #1 global fulfillment platform trusted by thousands of leading e-commerce brands to streamline operations, get back time to grow your business, and reduce fulfillment costs by up to 30%. Get started in any of ShipBob's 50-plus global warehouses to unlock 2-day shipping, direct integrations with all major platforms and sales channels, branded custom packaging, and more. Just go to www.shipbob.com/thread or click the link in the description below to sign up today and get $1,000 in free shipping credits and 90% off implementation. Gotcha. Okay, so I think like when I see this question, a lot of what I think about is just sort of this idea that, I mean, this is a refrain I've heard over years and years, which is that CPMs keep going up. It's just harder and harder to make money on Facebook. To what extent is that true? So there's this, like you just mentioned, there's this issue of sort of diversified distribution. But how about on this single channel? Like, is that
Well, let's do that third
okay?
because
Sure.
I think it's the least of the
Okay.
problems. Okay. I think problem number 2. So if problem number 1 is diversification of distribution, and that would include wholesale. Wholesale, if you make your product available at every 7-Eleven on earth or whatever retailer, you are going to see people think there's like a halo lift of incremental impact to your comm revenue. I actually think it's very often the other way, but that's a whole separate conversation and probably differs more brand to brand than anything else. But the second problem, so problem 1, diversification of distribution. Problem 2, diversification of ad spend. Okay, is that people what they tend to believe, this is just be a pervasive narrative that people buy into with very little evidence to support it, is that you need to be spending in lots of different media channels. So let's imagine last year you spent 80% of your budget on Meta and 20% on Google. And then as a initiative, you said in 2024, we are going to diversify our media mix. So now you take 30% of that budget that was on Meta and you take it to TV and TikTok and Pinterest and Snapchat and testing podcasts and newsletters. What you've done is you've moved from the most incrementally impactful channel in many cases to lower incrementally impactful channels that are harder to measure. And so you've made your overall media mix less efficient. This happens all the freaking time. And it's done almost entirely because people believe you should, more than that there's evidence that it's the right decision. Channel expansion beyond Meta is almost always destructive to your efficiency, especially in the short term, and can be net beneficial to volume and opportunity, but it was almost always destructive to efficiency. It introduces measurement complexity. And generally speaking, the reason those channels don't get the bulk of dollars is because they're less effective. They are just less effective. So the idea is that channel expansion is great if you're winning in Meta and you can go to another channel and even taking a lower return, you can still be incremental. And so you're expanding volume, but you shouldn't channel diversify under the pretense that it's about efficiency. Consolidation for efficiency, diversification for volume is generally speaking what you're trying to accomplish with those two strategies.
Yeah.
But I see people pursue diversification as if it's a solution to inefficient Meta problems. And that's generally not the case. You're only going to make it worse. And that creates this experience that I spent a bunch more money and got less out of it because you spent it on shittier mediums.
I was going to ask you, like, so yeah, maybe dig into some of the reasons that people seem to feel like that they should expand into these other channels. I mean, it sounds like the core issue is almost like this is creating some sort of a loop. Like you feel like you're spending more to acquire less on Meta, therefore you expand your spend into other channels, which then only exacerbates the problem. Maybe is that accurate, or like what do you think's going on there?
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing it introduces is creative complexity. So the spending more also comes from like, what's harder to do? Make a great long form YouTube ad and a Meta ad and a billboard ad and a podcast read and a newsletter medium. They're different creative exercises with different creative processes that often require different people. And so you introduce immense complexity. There's less clarity about what works and what doesn't. So you're sort of entering back into the testing phase of a channel where you're trying to figure out what works. That's generally more expensive. And so you really have to think about those channels as an investment with a long-term payback period, not as a short-term solution to efficiency problems. So those channels have merit. And I've talked about this before where diversification of media is a lot like when I want to, when I have an investment portfolio and I'm like, you know what I would like to do? Buy some real estate. And it's like, well, you don't buy real estate if the goal is to make your money back in 60 days. You do it if you're trying to create a long-term channel where in the short term it's going to be all cost. I bought the house, that was a big expense, and now I'm remodeling this X, Y, and Z. And you know what? 4 years from now, this is going to be a really great asset that I'm going to be able to have as a part of my foundation. That's what those channels are. But people think about them as I've got a problem to my business efficiency. I need to go try Pinterest.
Right.
That is not going to solve the problem. It's going to increase this sense of inefficiency across the board in the short term.
Gotcha. Okay, so then let's dive into reason number 3, which is potentially that you really are spending more on Meta to acquire less. CPMs up, whatever, CPAs up, whatever the case may be. So let's dive into what might be happening there.
Yeah. So one of the things that happens is that we like to believe that there's this like perfectly linear relationship between spend and efficiency. Whereas Meta always like perfectly sequences through like the lowest CAC upwards. And so then like you only have to worry about your next marginal dollar being bad. But the reality is if I set a budget today on Meta and I set it for $1 million, what wouldn't happen is that the first purchases were like really efficient. And then the ones later in the day were inefficient. That's not how it works. What you've given Meta the authority to do is to bid to win every individual auction more aggressively. And so it reduces the efficiency of the total spend, not the next incremental dollar.
Hmm.
And so as brands attempt to scale their budget, they degrade the efficiency of all of the budget. Versus if you can do this with cost controls where you say never bid unless the efficiency is within expectation. When you bid lowest cost and raise your budgets, you actually can degrade the entire budget
Mhm.
such that as you move up and down, you don't experience like this slowly planed off like linear. It becomes exponentially degradatory. And so that's another experience is that as brands begin to try to push budget aggressively, they go from not just like that next tranche being degraded, but their first tranche being degraded as well.
Mm.
And so I think that it makes the overall efficiency worse. So that's part of it. And then there's just this sense by which, yes, the as you move out the customer curve, the next customer to acquire becomes more expensive. But that wouldn't lead to the experience you're describing, which is I'm spending more to make the same amount.
Mhm.
If the next margin, if all the current tranche of customers was the same price, then I wouldn't actually be experiencing that
Right.
because that would just mean that the I'm paying $5 and $5 and $5. And so I can maintain that base, which would keep my revenue base the same. And then just the next tranche would become inefficient.
Mhm.
But that's not really what happens. It's the whole thing is becoming inefficient in some way as well.
Gotcha. So let me just make sure I'm understanding here correctly. It's like the idea is that this is you're perceiving an inefficiency problem when in fact what may be happening is that you are having some sort of incremental gain on Facebook, but the overall effect feels that, or it makes it feel like the overall effect on the ad account is degrading, even though there may be benefit to expanding into that incremental tranche.
That's right. It's you don't actually know where the marginal frontier is and what the incremental impact is. And that's the challenge, right? And that's why there's so much energy right now around this idea of trying to understand what is the incremental impact of this channel.
Mhm.
And what people do generally speaking, like if you go read a bunch of the tweets I put out of like, you got this incrementality read from Meta and Google, what would you do next? Almost always people say like pull back spend.
Mhm.
Okay. Because they assert this linear relationship between spend and incrementality. And I would just say, like, very dangerous idea.
Hmm.
What you actually want to do is to figure out how to maintain the spend level, but increase the incremental impact, which I
Interesting.
think has to do, which I think has to do with the way in which you're spending, the tactical structural setup of the account and the optimization settings more than it does that you just need you're overspending.
Yeah.
There's no guarantee that if you pull back spend that you increase the incremental impact or your IROAS in a perfectly linear fashion.
Yeah.
Um, and so that tends to be what happens is like if you just cut as the solution, you're going to suffocate your business likely down into death.
Mhm.
And so you actually have to figure out how to increase spend, but increase incrementality along the way. That's really the key to the game.
That's interesting. Okay, so because I was gonna let's say let's jump into solutions here, but I think you're already suggesting an interesting one for that last piece, which is that, yeah, generally speaking, in let's say some of the AMER models that I've been a part of or whatever, it does sort of the obvious solution that recommends itself is that, like, at this level of spend, every dollar you're spending is losing money. Therefore, cut the spend. All the spend that you're spending is going to be profitable. But you're saying,
Yeah,
okay, so
wrong.
in that, say, incremental 10 or 20K that you're spending, what are those tactical things you're alluding to that you can put into place to make that incremental spend efficient, basically?
I'm sure this is going to be a boring refrain from me, but
Let's hear it.
increase the amount of shots on goal that you
Yeah.
take against a rigorous standard of obligation, right? So the first thing you have to introduce is the boundary.
Mhm.
And the boundary says, I can only spend if my IROAS is profitable. Using whatever mechanism that you want, my idea would be like a weighted factor against an optimization setting in the channel, a TROAS or a cost control, using an incremental weighted factor. And I only spend if I'm achieving that goal. Now go develop the creative system to solve for that constraint.
Mhm.
So you have to alter the constraint. This is the key. Your whole organization will pivot its behavior if you say, sorry, y'all, we don't spend unless it's efficient,
Mhm.
but you still have to spend.
Yeah.
Now what? Well, I better figure out how to win against that new game, which probably means if I was trying 2 things before, I might need to try 10 things or 20 things or 50 things. There's a great, I'm going to post, shout out to Dara Denny, who I think makes great TikTok content. She has a breakdown today of Loop earplugs, who I just think these guys are the best. They're the best advertisers. They have 5,314 ads live in their Meta account. They're just, they are relentless at pursuing every angle with different audiences and really trying to solve for the problem. This is a product with minimal LTV and they are scaling aggressively and they are trying everything thoughtfully at scale. You got to do more. This is, I hate that this is the solution. I wish it was easy, that it was just like, just spend another couple hours in the bath
Mhm.
thinking about a better idea. But I just don't know that person. I don't know the person who can go do that and come up with the ad that works every time.
Yeah.
It's really, really, really hard. So 5,314 ads to produce large scale efficient outcomes in a channel that welcome to the game you're in.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Yeah, I was going to say, like, one thing that we've talked about before is that there's an analogy in ad creative to, like, the film business, which is that fundamentally there's no formula. You're just trying to have a hit, and there's nobody who really knows how to do it. And so the advantage that we have over the film industry is we can make 5,000 of these things relatively quickly. And so that's sort of the logic of it is just clearly like you have to make as many as possible. And if you have a bad idea, don't worry, nobody's going to see it because Facebook will kill it because no one will respond to it. You know what I mean? But yeah, no, that's fascinating.
Yeah. And I think that the movie thing is interesting too, right? Like, because there would probably be people that would say, well, there are some things like make Avengers 7
Sure. Yeah.
and you're going to have some success. And I would just say, sure. I will concede if you have $500 million and a bunch of A-list celebrities, I like your chances of success more than most.
Mhm.
But that's not the game we're playing. What we're more akin to is like we're all indie filmmakers and the question is, can you guarantee that your thing will be a hit within the context of that environment? And the answer is no. Now you are much closer to the random lottery game that you described,
Mhm.
or like you are a musician. Like I was listening to the story of like Noah Khan
Mhm.
recently, and I think this is much more akin to like thinking about advertising, which is Noah Khan was functionally a failed musician who moved back home to his parents' house and was just ready to give up. And in his depression and drinking, made a random TikTok song with a hook that goes mega viral and becomes stick season and a hit and changes his life forever.
Yeah.
Like what is that? How do you try to replicate that success? Like there is no like you can't go like let's break apart the component parts of that TikTok ad and figure out how to become a viral superstar
Mhm.
sensation. Why did it work? I don't know. But that moment in time, it has struck some chord with people in some way that has compounded with his actual underlying skill and blah, blah, blah. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I think we have to recognize the game that we're in. And it's much closer to like the last podcast we did, and hopefully you all are listening to it with the guys of Baseball Lifestyle, is we're all over here looking at their $1 million day that they just did on back to school. But that story starts with the founder, Josh Shapiro, for 6 straight years, posted from 12 PM till midnight every hour on the hour on Instagram for 6 years. For 6 years, every day 12 times a day. How many of you are actually willing to do that? Like, how many of you actually have that relentless commitment
Mhm.
to just gutting it out on volume to become a thing that maybe hits someday? Like, that's so much closer to this game.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
So, but it's also relentless commitment in the same place. Like, the thing I think about this efficiency game is that, like, until you have meta cracked, and I mean scaling efficiently, creative system, consistently producing results that work for your business, do not even think of touching another channel. And I just go like, well, most people have that channel's like a nightmare while they're trying to nightmarishly solve every other channel. And it's like, I don't, yeah, it's chaos. Like, you can't, each of these things is such a complex system. And this thing where you're spending all your dollars until that works, don't worry about the next thing.
Yeah, no, totally. No, it's yeah. I think like we could probably summarize some of these solutions as make more creative, don't expand beyond meta until you're ready, which is obviously those have been refrains of ours for a long time. I think it's fascinating though that idea of like if let's say your incrementality report says that the next tranche of $20,000 of spend or whatever isn't efficient, that should empower you to try to make that spend efficient rather than to cut back that spend. Because I think the way a lot of people react to that sort of report is this idea that it's just a fact of life that if we spend 150K this month, we'll be efficient, and the next 10K just won't be efficient. And that's just kind of how it works. But you also have some control in that to actually affect that, affect some change there, I guess. And then like the other thing would be, this is sort of like a data transparency, maybe to pop back to that first reason you mentioned about like the sort of diversification of distribution, then not really understanding the attribution there. So would you say like the solution to this is just sort of incrementality studies, or which is sort of like the broad?
Okay. So the question is, do you just do incrementality studies? Well, I think so. I'm gonna share my screen real fast for those of you that are following along. This is an image that Ron Jacobson, who I think is a smart dude, to be clear, from Rockerbox, shared the other day about like, so it's a pyramid, and on the bottom, and so it's like intending to represent the idea that evidence strength moves up as you move up this pyramid. And on the bottom is surveys and third-party data. The next tranche is attribution, data-driven multi-touch, then attribution enriched with durable IDs, then marketing mix modeling. And at the top is experiments, geo experiments, one-party holdout, channel lift studies. And that the thing says evidence strength moves up. And the question is just like, well, where's the threshold where the evidence is actually useful at all?
Yeah.
And I would just argue that like there seems to be consensus around the idea that the top of the pyramid, Google calls it the gold standard, is this idea of geo holdout and experiment. Now, that's still subject to real limitations in lots of ways, but we should always have to operate around our best available truth. And so we should seek out the best available truth. And if everybody's telling us this is the present way to achieve the best available truth, then as much as possible, we should use that information. That's what I would just say right now, while acknowledging its potential limitations in its ability to be recreated consistently, given the dynamic nature of the variables that it's assessing. It still often will provide for us best available truth, which I think is the best source for decision making.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that unless there's anything else you want to hit, I think that wraps it up for us today. So I was going to mention that this obviously we've been talking a few times over the last couple of weeks about what CTC is offering in terms of including incrementality in our service offering in order to give you not only transparency on exactly or specifically the incrementality of your spend, but also offer sort of the service to address some of the other two issues that we talked about just now in terms of spending more to acquire the same amount. So obviously hit us up, commonthreadco.com, hit the hire us button. We'd love to talk to you more.
So in summary, if you are experiencing the sensation that you're spending more money to get less, there's three things that I would look at. One is, have you expanded distribution into places that might be competing for the realization of that revenue? And is it a question of how you're going to measure the allocation of your dollars against things like Amazon and wholesale, et cetera? Two is, have you gone into media channel diversification such that more of your dollars are being allocated to less efficient channels? That can create a similar sensation. And then three is more about the individual channel performance results that you're going after. Have you attempted to increase the budget such that your overall degradation has dipped exponentially into a place where you are actually increasing spend and getting less revenue in total than if you were to pull back? That could be related to optimization settings. Maybe there's too much view creeping in. Maybe there's too much budget being spent on existing customers as your customer base has grown, and you need to get back to religiously focusing on incremental clicks to net new customers against an incrementality read that makes you really effective in an individual channel. So that's where I would start. If you're experiencing that sensation, check those three things.
Cool. All right, folks. Thanks for joining us, and we will talk to you next week. Bye.